John from Ripewave Audio to give you a review and comparison of the Fosi Audio ZD3 DAC Preamp. Now this small desktop unit sells for about $180, give or take, and is pretty well constructed with a lot of features, and I'm going to explain why I think this is a pretty good unit and might suit your needs as you try to build out a system or complement it. But you might be asking yourself why we're sitting here in front of my Sony direct drive turntable, Parasound Phono preamp, and a couple of my favorite direct-to-disc audio recordings with a digital device such as this. Because this review, we're going to do a little different. I went out there on the internet and there's got to be hundreds of reviews on this unit. And I wanted to do something a little different. And I want to start with explaining why you might need this device. Why do you need a DAC? What is a DAC? And how the reasons for buying this external DAC is very similar to going out and getting an external preamp like this Parasound Z Phono. So come with me on this journey, and we're going to move to the front of the room and we're going to tell the rest of the story. Now we're situated back at the front of the room. We've got our ZD3 set up here. We'll go over how we've done our test setup in a bit and all the different things that can connect up to it. But let's first tell our story. And I think this really, the way I wanted to start here is with analog. When you think of analog, it's a microphone. I've got a microphone here that can go for live performance, right into a mixer and then to an amplifier and then to a speaker. And everything is analog, end to end, and there's no digital. Now, of course, you can have digital in a live performance now, but in a very simple way, it could all be analog. And then for the playback of analog, and here's where our direct-to-disc recordings come in. My dad bought these in the 70s, Charlie Bird, Les Brown. These are recordings that went through 0 digital stages. In fact, very little processing at all, and it went right to the lathe to cut that record and out to distribution. This is kind of like the last big push on analog before things started switching over to digital with the advent of the CD. You had these direct-to-disc recordings coming out, and they still sound good today. I really like, we always like Les Brown when he does Sir Duke. The rasp of the brass instruments on that. And then on the Charlie Bird, the first cut on the second side, the old hymn with the drum solo on there, just incredible. And still sounds good on a turntable today. This would be all analog as well, from the record to the turntable to your integrated amp and then out to your speaker. Doesn't have to go digital anywhere in the mix. But when we get to digital recordings, this is where you can take your analog microphones. Has to start analog. Our voices are analog. But then we have a device. We have this music interface here. This is what I use all the time for these recordings. I also use it with my little electric piano and Roland synthesizer on a day-to-day basis. And this is going through not a DAC process initially, but an analog to digital or ADC conversion, taking it from analog to digital, so ultimately we can record it. Now today I'm going into my Canon camera, and that's recording the output of this, but it could go into a laptop like my MacBook and record that digitally. But now, what about the playback? How do we take it from the digital domain so we can listen again? Now, this little device here, this music interface, actually can convert back to analog. And that's what makes this special. So it has a DAC, a digital to analog converter in there, takes it back to analog. Then we can plug headphones into this and listen to it, because you have to, before it goes back to the speaker needs an analog signal. Now, for the normal home use, mostly using phones like the iPhone, like iPods or something similar. And in these typically it's still digital by the time it hits those ear pods, those in-ear monitors. And the actual iPod has a digital to audio conversion in there. It's built into it. And even with the more advanced iPod Max, that looks like a traditional headphone, like an analog headphone, but it's actually taking digital right to it. Now, I understand it also has an analog input, but it still converts it back to digital to do some DSP or whatever it's doing in there. I haven't really studied this device, but these have a DAC in it as well. Now, if you want to improve on the quality of the signal, you may decide, I'm not going to use the digital audio converter that's in my computer, my MacBook, my Windows or Chromebook. I am going to take that out and have a device. And now here we're showing a Dragonfly from AudioQuest. It's one of the smaller units you can get. Plugs right into a USB port. Of course, it has to go through a little adapter if it needs to get into a MacBook because it's a USB-A. But that's doing that necessary digital audio conversion. And the whole premise on this device is it's advertised as doing better than what is built into your computer. You could take that up a notch and have some other functions rather than just a pure DAC for a full desktop system. And those systems can have a preamp, an amplifier in it. Then you just have to add a couple of speakers to it. And you've got a little mini system that you can do right at your workstation and use. Some of them even have streamers built into it, as in this DeLorean edition from Cambridge Audio for its streamer playback with amplification. Kind of an all-in-one system, but it has a DAC built into it for improved, not just improved audio quality, but here they're trying to make it a full improved experience for your streaming. Now, of course, our AV receivers and our processors have DACs in them as well. Movie content is usually streamed over through HDMI cabling, multi-channel in a lot of cases. It could be a 7.4.4 like this Marantz Cinema 50 as this could be here, and that's going out to multiple speakers, and it has a digital audio converter channel for every channel that you have to output. So if in this case you've got a 7.4.4, you have that many channels of DAC in it. Now it might need multiple DAC chips to get there, but ultimately covers all those channels. Of course, these can be more advanced units. You can pay more for these receivers, and your hope is you get better audio quality, like going from Marantz up to Macintosh to their receivers. Let's look at it from another way. We can separate these things out. We were on the back of the room, and I decided to put in a phono preamp. Now, my Marantz Cinema 50 has a phono preamp built into it. It's moving magnet only. I have a moving coil cartridge I can put on my Sony turntable, and it won't work with the Marantz. And so I need a preamp that can take that. Furthermore, what you have built into a lot of these receivers have no adjustments for capacitance or other parameters that fine-tune and make it compatible with the cartridge that you have on your turntable at the time. With that Parasound, I can make some adjustments, and that's not available to what's built in. And this is a reason why people start to go to separates. More control, more specifics for the source that's coming into it, and hopefully the ultimate goal is to get it to sound better as a result. Now, the other thing I can do with that external phono preamp is that has balanced out, and that allows me to put it at the back of the room, run it long distances back to where my AV processor is. That takes the balance in, and that's my RMC1 that has that balanced input and keeps that at the back of the room. And I don't have now the speakers actually interacting with the cartridge and causing a rumble. And that's one of the reasons why I have it at the back of the room. I was getting some rumble from the speakers. But taking this to a bigger extreme, Macintosh makes a separate for just about everything that's out there. You can buy a separate CD, SACD player, a streamer. That is a digital source. On the analog source, they make turntables. They have separate phono preamps. They give you even external AM, FM tuners. Those are hard to find nowadays. They're usually either built into your receiver processor or people don't even put them in their systems. But then you have a preamp that conditions those signals, and it's, in this case, a full analog preamp. Now I got to get that digital chain to the analog in some way, so I have a digital to audio converter from Macintosh to do that, to take those digital sources in. And if I want to do any processing, Macintosh makes an equalizer, so I can tune to the bands of what I want to boost and cut. But what if I want to do room correction? Well, Macintosh makes a unit which has the room perfect system in it that will do this, and that's a technology they get from Lingdorf. This unit, though, it doesn't have any digital inputs, so it's only taking an analog input. So you need an analog to digital converter, then it converts it back to digital, and then you can send it to your preamp, and then out to your speakers, ultimately through an amp, and then to your maybe Macintosh speakers. I don't see a lot of people doing Macintosh speakers, even if they have Macintosh components. But anyhow, this is taking it to the extreme on separates. But why would we single out? Why would we actually look at a DAC as something I want to improve in my signal chain? Remember, the ultimate goal is to make it sound better. Now, this is pretty, I think, accepted guidance that we see out there. I was listening to Darko the other week in one of his videos, and I think he made a lot of sense. If you want to improve your sound, the best place to start is your room. Put room treatments in, or make sure your system's going into the right room, and have those professionally done. The next place which would have a real noticeable improvement in your sound quality is upgrading your speakers, followed by your amplifier, and then start looking at things like DACs and cables and all that. All these things can have influence, but it can be said, if your room isn't good, your speakers aren't good, and your amplifier is good, you're not going to be able to notice the enhancements that a DAC can bring as easily as those who have very good components upstream. The problem is, to do a room better and have better speakers and amplifiers, these are pretty expensive upgrades. Now, you can spend a lot for a DAC as well, but you don't have to. That's what we're going to get into here. And because you don't have to spend as much, you might actually start there versus upgrading your speakers, because it's more effective, cost effective, to get some improvement than to go out and do this big investment on speakers, which some of the guidance is to spend twice as much on your speakers as you do your other components. So we started looking at the whole field of digital audio converters, and there's a lot of them. And I only have really a subset represented on this slide. And I could divide them up into three classes or categories of design: the portable units, the desktop units, which this is a desktop unit, and hi-fi components, things that more fit into a rack-like design that would go with all your other stereo things. Now, it isn't to say that a portable or a desktop couldn't be used in my standard system, and I do use some of those. It just doesn't have that same look and feel. And we take a quick look at this. We see prices ranging from $60 to almost $22,000 for just a digital audio converter. And I picked units here specifically that didn't bake a lot of things into it. You can get all sorts of combinations of features into a product nowadays. The most common you see nowadays has a streamer built into it. And that's got a lot of buzz out there. I didn't pick any here that have a streamer built into it. Some of these have a headphones built into it or a preamp built into it, but that's it. Some of them have different input capabilities, different output capabilities. We'll go into it. But where do we see the Fosi Audio ZD3 sitting in this? It is a desktop unit, kind of sitting in the center here. $180 actually is on the lower scale if you took an average of everything that's on the slide here. Not the cheapest unit, but it isn't a bare bones unit. It has a lot into it. Let's go into this a little deeper. I'm going to do something else I've never done is I'm referring to some data from another site. Now, Audio Science Review, they do measurements. Not everybody subscribes to the mindset that they have on that channel. But what I feel is Amir does things in a very consistent way. And he's tested a lot of devices. And he's tested a lot of things that are DACs or components that have DACs like receivers. So I can get, at least relatively speaking, his approach is to use a measurement called SINAD, and he plots these on a graph, and as from poor to fair to very good to excellent. What you'll notice, and his excellent color is blue, we usually use green, but I'm sticking with his convention for this slide, is most of these devices fit in the blue category for ones that he's researched, and he researched most of these. I did an analysis. There are a couple that are in the red zone. The Fosi Audio, I think, sits pretty well. It's got a measurement of 117 for the SINAD. That's in the blue category, kind of squarely in the middle. I think on his page he even says, if you're somewhere in the blue, you're probably not going to hear any difference between the devices. What we tend to find on his measurements that receivers and processors don't make it into the blue category. He finds more noise and more distortion with those devices. The only two products that we found in the green, the very good, were the RMC1, which we have from Emotiva, and the Monoprice HTP1. Anthem AVM70, which is hardly regarded and has a pretty good DACs in it, is into the orange zone, along with the Marantz Cinema 40. They don't have the Cinema 50, which we have on the chart. But even something like an Arcam AV40, which people buy for its sound quality, gets a poor rating from his measurements. And take this for what you will. I just wanted to have some sort of benchmark that we could look to. But what this is really telling me is, regardless of the price, we're not seeing significant improvements in this measurement that he's doing. Notice that a few of them I've got in an outline, like on the Jaegersil DAC, that only got an 86 rating, but that wasn't the plus version. He measured an older version. Now they got the plus, so they could be better. So keep that in mind. On the musical fidelity, rating of 97, but that wasn't the M6, that was the MX DAC, which is a less expensive unit. And the Dynafreps Terminator was not measured. He measured the Aries 2, which again is less money. And the Vice Helios, again, was a different model at a lower cost. But if we look at this deeper and look at the chips that are in this, or how they do the conversion, and the most common is using a commercial off-the-shelf digital to audio converter chip from the likes of ESS, AKM, Texas Instruments, which is also labeled as Burr Brown, which is a company they bought, as well as Cirrus Logic. A couple of these manufacturers don't use a DAC chip in their product. No, they use something called a free programmable gate array. And we see this is what Chord is doing with their products. It adds cost. They develop how this is going to work. Dynafreps does it a different way. They use an R2R, so a ladder of resistors, to do the conversion. So they're discrete solutions out there versus using a chip. So that approach is different. Doesn't mean it's better, but it's different. Now, some people swear by them, and we see a lot of gospel out there on the internet that the free programmable gate array is way to go, or an R2R design is way to go. I'm not going to get into that here. I'm just saying these are some of the options you'll see out there. We notice that a lot of these units actually use the exact same DAC chip. So the ES9038 Pro is very common from ESS. We see that in the S.M.S.L, in their SU9, as well as their SU10 product. We see it in Eversolo on their DAC Z8, and we also see it in the topping DX7. Another popular chip is the ESS ES9038Q2M, which is a variation within kind of the same numbering, kind of the same class, but a variation of that. And that we see in the Dragonfly from AudioQuest, the Cobalt, and the topping D10S, which is a very affordable unit at $109, as well as Musical Fidelity's M6. But notice the price difference there. You got a topping D10S for $109. The same chip is in Musical Fidelity's M6, which is almost $2,600. The chip itself isn't dictating the price, or I would say the sound quality. Now what I've done here is I've put in the specifications that the chip manufacturers put in, but in the cases of the free programmable gate arrays and the R2R products, really what those units are putting out, they don't specify the output from that lot. I mean, the output is the output, the total system. So that's what I put there for a comparison. But you'll find that the end results, what manufacturers specify for output, is in most cases lower than what the chip can output. Albeit these standalone DACs tend to be a lot closer than what we see on a receiver. That number's usually degraded quite a bit. And I think this is because when you have a receiver or a processor, there's a lot more going on there. There's a lot more paths for that signal to get to before it finally gets out of the device. Versus a standalone DAC can keep things simpler, so you don't see that degrading from what's being published by the chip manufacturers. Now, I also put at the top of the screen here the DAC chips which are used in receivers. Now notice that that ES9038Q2M chip is also used in the AVM70 from Anthem. Yet, the noise and distortion got measured a lot lower at 99 versus a $109 device from Topping got a rating of 112. Oh, very interesting data there. So the chip itself isn't accounting for this wide range of prices of these devices, nor is it guaranteeing a certain low distortion and noise. So we really got to look at the whole unit. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And you can study this data in a lot further, but focusing on the Fosi ZD3, this has got the ESS ES9039, not 38, 39 Q2M chip. It's one of their newer chips. Outputs the chip itself 130 dB, which is among the best that are on this list, and a THD plus N of a negative 120 decibels, which is also, among the top class of chips themselves. And even the free programmable gate arrays and R2R versions aren't bettering those outputs that we get from the chip. So it's got a very good chip in there. But I would always equate it to, you're making a recipe. Just because you start with quality ingredients doesn't mean it's going to taste good. So that's my analogy for this one. Let's start looking at some of the unique features of these standalone DACs. Some of them have a built-in preamp, like the Fosi Audio ZD3, and other ones have just a headphone amp. And the portable ones tend to just have a headphone amplifier into it. Now, if we went into this deeper, we would see some of them support a balanced and an unbalanced headphone jack. We got that on another slide. On the preamps, we start to see those come in with the desktop models. As I said, the Fosi one does. Now, Fosi Audio, on the bottom of this, there is a switch to do a bypass. Now, I'm looking into the manuals for some of the other ones that have a preamp, like the SU9 and the DAC Magic and the topping DX7 Pro Plus and the Burson Composer 3X. They state that you can determine whether that's fixed or variable, but they don't use the word bypass. Now, To me, bypass has an additional meaning. Bypass means I'm going to bypass circuitry, and it's going to be a cleaner signal out. Now, it could be that some of these others are also doing a true bypass, but they're not claiming it. So for now, I'll just write that they can be configured as a fixed volume out, like you were going to somebody else's preamp, or a variable where you're going to use the preamp built into the DAC. Now, one thing about the Fosi Audio ZD3 is it doesn't have a built-in headphone amplifier, whereas some of them do, particularly in the desktop category. The Cambridge Audio and the Topping models do have that capability. And we see some of the hi-fi component ones also having a built-in preamp. Again, not claiming that it's a true bypass, but saying you can adjust fixed or variable. And some of them still have headphone outputs. And if you look deeper, you could find the combination you really want. On the really high-end models, like over $5,000, we don't see either a preamp or a headphone jack on at least the ones on my chart. Now, looking at just the inputs, what you typically see are options for Bluetooth, USB, some sort of specialized input like an HDMI ARC, AES EBU, or IC2 interface. You'll have the options for Toslink, optical input, or a coaxial input. And we've indicated them here. Now, in one case, the Eversolo has both a Type B and a Type C connector on the back so you can bridge generations. Now, this device only has a Type B, and it's been commented before that that's kind of old technology. Why didn't you just put a USB-C on the back of this, like on this Mark of the Unicorn interface is got a Type C? But I found a way around it because a lot of your laptops now, particularly if you're buying a MacBook, only have USB-C. Well, you can buy a USB-C to Type B connector, and that's what I did for $6. I got it on Amazon the next day, and now I can plug directly into the back of the Fosi. It was an easy problem to solve. I do like what Eversolo has done is giving you those two options so you don't have to go hunting for cables if you've already converted everything to USB-C. But it's not the end of the world if it doesn't. Other things I want to point out here is the Bluetooth interface. Now, I'm not a big fan of Bluetooth, but some people like the convenience. And you have different types of users in your house. They may not care about sound quality and they just want to connect. And well, this will allow you to do it in a very easy way. And there's different versions of the USB standard from 4.2 on up. We've got them indicated here as supported for those that do support that. I will note here that as you get up on higher price units, they start to support more audiophile style interfaces like AES EBU, which is really more of a balanced version of SPDIF, the Sony Philips interface. But then there's also ISC2, which was originally designed as an internal protocol, and it simplifies and separates out my basic understanding here, the data clocks and the data signals, and can be cleaner, but results can be varying depending on certain circumstances, which one of those digital interfaces are actually going to sound better. So again, I'm not going to get into that depth. You pick the ones that you like as you go forward here. In some cases, the coaxial connection for digital is BNC, as we see on some of the hi-fi components. Sometimes they give you multiple inputs. In some cases, 2 coax, 2 optical, for example. That's available there. Now, what I like about the Fosi audio unit, it does have a great range of inputs that it will accept. So we talked about the Bluetooth, the USB. It does have support for HDMI ARC connections. If your sources are going to your TV, you can send that audio data back to the Fosi audio for better interpretation of the digital to analog conversion and out to your hi-fi system. So that's really helpful there, and it has the optical and the coax connections as well. Now, speaking about Bluetooth a little bit more, and we showed on that table that Fosi's coming in at 5.1 which is one of the newer standards. It came out in 2019. But I want to call out anything from 5.0 to 5.4 is really getting the same advantages out of the Bluetooth standard, which is essentially the maximum data rate, the support for low energy, and the maximum range, how far the radios can be apart. So 240 meters is pretty darn good for in-house use as it is. So that covers down those things, the power, the rate, the range, the security, the latency. This is what these standards have been addressing as they've been introduced, but it does not introduce the audio quality. That comes with something else. So for audio quality, there's the Bluetooth codecs. And this can, a lot of places, be inserted into really any of those Bluetooth versions. But the other thing you have to be conscious of is, does my sending device support a particular codec, not just the receiving? So they have to be a common denominator. The one codec that all of them have to support is SBC. The problem is it isn't that good. SBC was more designed for telephony applications. 16 bits is the maximum. 48 kilohertz, but not all of them support 48 kilohertz. It could be less. That's the maximum sample rate that you can get out of SBC. So then there was introduced all these others in different years. AAC is what Apple has aligned on. That's going to give you 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. That's supported by iOS, but starting with Android, it's got support since Android 8 Plus. So likely, if you have an Android device, you support those. But there's other ones out there. Qualcomm has a slew of standards, from the standard aptX to the HD version to the adaptive version, low latency version, and now they're lossless, but not many devices support that full suite of Qualcomm codecs. What you pretty much see is aptX and aptX APT-HD. Those are the most common, and are supported by Android, but not iOS. LDAC is the Sony codec. Android supports it, iOS doesn't. And then there's LHDC, which is also an Android supported. But Fosi is going to do the first four that are here. Now, I didn't do the deep dive on all the different DACs out there, but if you want to take advantage of some of these other codecs, you may have to look at a different DAC. But my feeling is, if you're really chasing sound quality, I would recommend a wired connection, not the wireless. But it's good for convenience when you want to use it. Let's look at the outputs now. Now, as we said before, some of these units do support headphones, and they can be either balanced or unbalanced connections, but not all devices support both. What's neat is that Fosi Audio DS2 actually supports headphone connections on both balanced and unbalanced connection. Now, the form factors of the physical connectors can vary depending on what you look at. Typically, they're some sort of phono jack size that will do the headphone connection. Now, as far as the ZD3, you have balanced and unbalanced connections, but they're not for headphones. They're a line level connection. Now, we do see some devices here that supports headphone and line. You can sometimes select between the two of those, whether you're going to use the line, the headphones, or both at a time. In some cases, you see multiple outputs. So like the topping G5 has 2 headphone outputs on there. Where you have the Jaeger-Steel Plus that has 2 sets of unbalanced connections and 1 set of balanced connections. Now, the items in purple here are not really outputs, but I thought they were worth mentioning somewhere in the presentation. So a few of the devices support battery power, and we typically see those on portable devices. Now, what's nice about battery power is usually quite clean compared to what's coming through your line, so you don't have to necessarily worry about the quality of the power supply as much. So that would be on the BTR3, the FIO, I don't know how they pronounce it, and the iFi Griffin, which is battery powered on that unit. Cambridge, I have a note here on their DAC Magic, has a ground lift. if your sources are coming in at, if you want to change the way that's outputted. And the Macintosh has some extra I/O in there for data and RS-232 connections. Now, a note is placed on the topping D10S because it actually has SPDIF output. It's the only device that I saw had a SPDIF output. But what's neat about the Fosi audio, it does, as well as those balanced and unbalanced connections output, it has triggers in and out. Not many of these devices I found had the triggers in and out, but I did see it on the Fosi audio, the topping DX7 Pro Plus, the Macintosh, and the Hi-Fi Rose RD60. So it is some, which is normally associated with more expensive unit, on something for $180. Let's take a look at the unit itself. Now we look at the field, and if you have decided that, you know, a desktop style unit with this combination of inputs and outputs and Bluetooth capability is for you, meet your criteria. Let's take a deeper look at it, and we can see that the unit is, I think, a very attractive unit. It is that smaller form factor. It does come with a remote, pretty basic remote as we see in a lot of units, but gives you the convenience of changing the volume from a remote location. And we're not having to go up. You can change the volume from here. This wheel on the right does serve as a way to change the volume if the preamp is enabled, but it also allows you with a long push to turn the unit off or to turn the unit on. And we got that function. And then the short pushes will cycle between the different types of inputs, and which you see around the edges of the OLED display. Now, on the OLED display, I see the volume very clearly. I think a lot of reviewers do point out the fact that the source is a little hard to read. You can read it while you're up close, but not from a distance. But is it an attractive design? If we look at other features that Fosi has been advertising on their website, I've kind of cut and pasted a bunch of things that they've had here. They talk about the 5 input modes, which we kind of went over already, the Bluetooth. Here they're pointing out, I think is really nice, I don't see this a lot, you know, the maximum bit rate and sampling rate that is available for each interface. So Bluetooth is a maximum of 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. Now I might be varying on what codec is being used and what your source material is, but that's the maximum you can get out of it. Similarly, you know, we've got the USB. This is giving you the most capability of any of the inputs. That's up to 32-bit, 768 kilohertz, and it will do DSD, like we would have on a Super Audio CD, of 512. So that's a pretty good DSD format on that. And so the PCM, yeah, 768. The other interfaces don't support DSD, and they don't go up as high on the PCM support. So the ARC will only get to 192, which is adequate in most cases. Same with the Optical and the Coax. So those are all capabilities there. I will note here that the outputs, the balance gives you a 5-volt RMS output, and the unbalanced is 2.5 volts. So as you expected, kind of double of that, but it's going up to some good levels. Other things that they advertise is it's got this processor, the XMOS XU316 chip in there. They've got these op-amps that are part of the system, the LME 49720, and that they're swappable. We'll get more into that in a little bit. That's what we're starting to see on some of these DACs, is the ability to swap out op-amps if you want to have a little fun playing around. And you can see on the back of the unit in this picture too, really how everything is laid out with the triggers and the types of connectors you get for each other. This does not have a subwoofer out, nor did I find a subwoofer output on any of these models that were in kind of our selected paths. You seem to see those more that have an amplifier built in or streaming capabilities. They start to add in the subwoofer output on that. Of course, if you use this thing as a pure DAC, you could route that into your receiver, your processor, your integrated amp, and that could do the bass management, or your subwoofer could be doing this bass management directly. So let's talk a little bit about Op-Amp Rolling. And this is something I haven't had any experience with, but I'm going to. I've bought a couple of these to try out. We'll do another video later. I think the next video we're going to do is going to be just focused on the results of me swapping out. I got a Sparkos and a Burson Vivid set of op-amps, 2 each, that I can put into this unit. Here, now why would you do this in the first place, and what is an op-amp? Now, op-amp takes a low signal and raises it up. It's not full amplification, but it makes that signal a little bigger. So that's what these are used for. It's used right before the output of this. The thought is you can get a little sonic difference between the different chips that you might use. I'll point out that some of these are integrated circuits, and they tend to be lower cost. They cost a lot more to develop, but to produce, they cost a lot less to produce on an integrated circuit, and these are the most common. They can range between just over $1 to just over $25 for each of them. And as far as the discrete type, which is the Sparkos and the Burson op-amps, these are discrete. They cost a lot less to develop, but a lot more to produce because there's individual components that they have to put on a board, solder in, and ship out versus just one nice integrated platform. Some people believe that the discrete ones can have a great improvement over the sound. We'll find out. Going back to Audio Science Review, they did some measurements on several different op-amps and got very similar results. In fact, the commentary was too close to matter. But we'll see what we hear on the results. Here on the Fosi Audio site, they give some recommendations depending on the type of music that you listen to and how that might impact. Some people feel if they put in a certain op-amp, it's a good pairing if your speakers are either harsh or not so harsh. And again, they'll leave that up to you to decide, but I'll report out in the next video what my thoughts are. Now, this isn't the only device that does op-amp rolling. We do see this from the Topping D10S, but I noticed that their website says only do this if you're a professional. They don't recommend it to the non-professionals, whereas Fosi Audio says have at it. In fact, there's videos on their website shows you how to do this, how to open up the case, swap them out. And when you're doing this, there are 3 locations on the board. One of them is for the unbalanced connection, and 2 of them are for the balance. So the unbalanced have both the left and right channels with one op-amp, whereas the balanced outputs use a separate op-amp for each channel. Now let's take a look at the companion to the ZD3, which is the ZA3. This is an amplifier. This came out before the DAC ZD3. This is a 2-channel amplifier. It will put out 155 watts into 4 ohms for 2 channels, or you can set this to as a mono amplifier and get 235 watts into 4 ohms. This is using a 48 volt power supply, 5 amp power supply. If you go with a 32 volt power supply, 5 amp power supply, then that is going to decrease down to 95 watts and 110 watts respectively. The great thing is you can pair these together. They look good together. The triggers in and out can be used with a short cable to then have one unit turn on the other, so it makes it nice and slick. You probably turn that bypass on the DAC and control the volume with just the amplifier, which is really a preamp built into that one as well. And might as well use the balance connections, a couple of short balance connections while you're at it, because they both have balanced connections. And with this pair here, you can set up a pretty nice desktop audio system, get a pair of speakers. Fosi even makes little desktop speakers, and use it in a very simple way. You might even be using the Bluetooth, as this picture suggests here, with the phone sitting next to it. Here's another example of a little desktop setup using this unit either alone or separately. You can even use the ZD3 in a hi-fi setup. And in this picture, they show the ZD3 with two ZA3s running in mono mode, one for the left channel and one for the right channel. So this really makes a nice, sophisticated system that doesn't cost a lot of money and fits on a small footprint and is light and doesn't generate a lot of heat. So this is a very compelling story. So let's get into now what we did for our test setup. And we started by testing all the different connection choices. The television, our Samsung 65-inch 4K TV, going out ARC. Now this does not support eARC, only ARC. So we took the output on the ARC of the television to the input of the ARC on the ZD3, and it all works quite nice. You got to make sure your CEC is turned on or it won't work. No problems there. Then we tested it with our iPhone, and we took a Bluetooth connection, and it paired very easily with the device. In fact, if you hit the button, you can actually start the pairing mode just by hitting the button, or you can use the remote, and makes that connection. And I could go with our Apple Music from the phone, and it worked just well. The next thing we tried was connection to our ultra high definition Blu-ray player, the Sony UDP X1100ES, and no trouble there. That was with a coax connection. Now, we didn't try the optical connection. That's one interface we didn't try, but assuming that would have worked just as well. And those were the ones that we're just testing functionally. What we really wanted to focus on was the MacBook connection using USB. So we took all that other stuff out of the way, and now we have our MacBook. The MacBook has two USB-C connections. Now, I already mentioned that the ZD3 does not have a USB-C connection. It has a B connection. But by buying that cable that took C to B, no trouble, just $6, so that was fine. And for the other USB connections, we have this adapter where we also needed to do a USB-A connection to some of the other devices. And we could do that. And this also has a USB-C. So in the Mac system preferences, on the sound output, I could select quickly between the ZD3 and my other DACs that I was testing out. The DAC that's in Mark of the Unicorn music interface, the Moto M4, as well as our Emotiva RMC1 that has the USB device connection on it, and we could switch easily between these three. The other thing I'll point out here is because the ZD3 is so light, and if you're going to use it with an XLR connection, those cables can be heavy, and the device itself starts to move around or maybe lifts up from the table. I recommend finding some way to hold it down, either like some Velcro, or I'm using an old-fashioned paperweight. I guess this is the new use for a paperweight. Not many people use those as paperweights anymore. We'll use it to hold down the ZD3. There's other adapters from Macintosh that will also give you what you might need to connect this up. No troubles there. The Macintosh instantly recognized the Fosi Audio ZD3. And I also tested it with a Windows laptop that I had using Windows 11. No trouble at all either. That connected up, instantly recognized. I used the Emotiva RMC1 because it does have a USB device connection on the back of it, which I don't have on my Marantz Cinema 50. Marantz can only take that streaming through the Bluetooth. It can't take it through a USB connection. So I had three options for DACs that I could switch between. And for the switching, I used an ABC switcher from Duke Audio. Two of the ports are balanced. One of them was unbalanced. I used the Mark of the Unicorn on the unbalanced and the RMC1 and the Fosi Audio on the balance connections and tried that. Out from the switcher, we went right into the Emotiva XPA1 monoblock amplifiers, which I have. connecting up to our 4 ohm Polk Audio LSI 15 towers, one for each. So this made a nice lick. So when I was switching between DAC sources, I also made the switch on the Duke Audio ABC at the same time, and then I could quickly hear the sources directed to the other DAC, and then I could hear it based off of the 2 switches I made simultaneously. Now I couldn't be doing that back at my seating position, but I could hear some tonal differences between each of the interfaces. What I found was they all sound good. There was no losers in this group. If I was going to pick one that I thought performed the least, it was probably the Mark of the Unicorn, but that may have been somewhat influenced by the fact that I was using unbalanced connection. Now this device does have balanced phono outputs, but I don't have a special phono, quarter-inch phono cable that will take that balance signal to an XLR. I could buy that adapter, I just don't have it. So that's why it got on the unbalanced connection. If I buy those cables, I will then swap it and see if that changes my preference, because I want to keep this as apples as possible. The other thing I did when the switching was I level matched. You don't want artificially having one source being louder than the other. So that's important as well. So doing the level matching is good. So the distant sound is good. I thought the RMC one and the Fosi audio both sounded great, kind of equally great. But I thought it was interesting that the Fosi audio ZD3 seemed to have a little more bass to it. For whatever reason. Is it the op-amps, other circuitry in it? I don't know. I might check just to double check. I try to turn off all the subwoofers. The RMC one was running in direct mode, so I didn't want to run it through any of the room correction. This doesn't have room correction. I didn't want it on the subwoofer. I just wanted the full signal going to the left and right channels with the least amount of colorization as possible from the RMC one. And of course, this unit, another thing I didn't bring up earlier, it doesn't have any filters. And some of its competitors do give you some filter choices on that. And some of those are the filters that are built into the DAC chip that you're really tapping into. In other cases, they might be adding something on top of it, but it's usually the DAC chip which is giving you those filter choices. But they went to the route is they disabled all the built-in filters. This is just the raw output, uncolored. So the fact that I didn't see much of a difference doesn't mean I'm not still interested in this. I am. I think this serves as kind of like a reference point for me. I compare a lot of equipment, and this will give me a good sense of what the signal's like if you don't colorize it, if you send it out pretty neutral. And I can compare it. This is, very similar to the RMC one, which is kind of my reference as well. But I can bring in anything else and also do that comparison with this. That's going to be helpful to me. I think that this device is really good for desktop. I think if that is your goal, why not just go ahead and get it? It's probably going to perform better than a lot of its peers. It's going to look good, and it has a good balance of inputs, outputs, capabilities. There's a couple things it doesn't have, and if that's important to you, you might look elsewhere. But if you were going to pair it with an amplifier, the fact that it has that matching amplifier and it's cosmetically, really nice, I think this makes for a very compelling story. Now, one thing you got to keep in mind when you're using this, it is always 2-channel. So if you're introducing, as well as all the other peers here that I presented, they're all 2-channel. They're not any multi-channel device in this list. You can get DACs that are multi-channel. We haven't covered them here. But if your goal is multi-channel, taking that DAC outside of your receiver, you're going to lose it, and you're not going to have that full experience. So what are your thoughts? Do you agree with some of commentary? Did you learn something the way we presented this maybe a little different than everybody else? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And until the next time, keep evolving your audio experience.